let's talk about, before we get started with the geopolitics of the evening. Let's talk about the situation that's happening on Twitter and on other platforms, and here on YouTube as well, because it's getting pretty insane when we start to think about. We all knew this was coming. We all knew that they were going to start deplatforming people at a fundamental level. This was always in the cards. At It was always going to be a moment where they were going to see the challenge to their power as something that needed to be contained, right? And I'm talking specifically now about we want to call them the left, but it's really just the people who currently hold power in the United States. And you call that the uniparty, the deep state, the shadow government, whatever you want. Pick your poison. It doesn't really matter. What matters is that all of these social networks over the last couple of years have outed themselves as nothing more than the means of control over the information, and over the narrative. And they're willing to engage in the most draconian um, um, draconian behavior possible, okay, to affect their ends. And we always knew that this was going to happen. At a fundamental level, we always knew it was going to come down to this, okay? And for the past 2 years now, the past year and a half or so, it's been brewing. This first is shadow banning, and then there's people being shut down for no reason, and YouTube channels being demonetized, and all of this stuff. But the trend has been in motion. They set everything up with this whole idea of fake news in order to say to an entire group of people that are loyal to them. We're talking now specifically about people who are willing to vote Democrat, and at this point in time, in order, and are fundamentally anti-Trump or anti everything that's not the march towards the globalist, egalitarian, progressive utopia, because that's what we're talking about. That's what's happening. That's what they believe in. And so because of that, that's where we are today. And it's always was always going to end here. So I was on with Halsey English on Andy Worski's channel, or actually on JF's channel, because we couldn't do it on Andy Worski's channel because he got a 90-day suspension from live streaming for a strike for something that got caught up in the algorithm mix of just wanting to deplatform and dehumanize, a great swath of people who are engaging in speech and engaging in ideas that are contra to the politics of those who are currently been empowered by these companies to enforce. Right, they're against that ideology. So that's where we are. I was on with them last night, and we were discussing. I was arguing with a pair of freaking neo Nazis about the Jewish question and all this other rotten nonsense, and it was actually not all that fun, and it wasn't even in many ways worth my time. It was nice to get some exposure to a larger audience, but at the same time, so what? It's a larger audience that's comprised mostly of a bunch of skinheads who pretty much think that everybody who's not them is a dirty Jew that needs to be gassed. And that's not really much of an audience to go after, right? So it is what it is. And then listening to, a smarmy limey like Mark Collette, and I mean that word sincerely, he's a limey. To listen to a smarmy limey like Mark Collette filibuster on for 15 minutes about nothing, and then turn around and then huff and puff and call everybody, say everything that, just respond to everything we say as calling him a straw man. It was just silly, and it was moronic and everything else. But at the end of the day, it is part of the process of allowing people to say what they need to say. And effectively I don't think that these people should be deplatformed in any way. I think that, the best way to beat them and beat their ideas is to let them expose themselves as the virulent anti-Semites that they are, and we'll go on. Something to bring up that came up in the debate over and over and over again, which is, don't ever let anybody back you down when you call them out on their racism or their sexism or whatever the hell it is, and say, when they say, and you say, look, you just think that all X are horrible people. And they go, no, really. I don't believe that all X act that way. I just believe some do. Well, that's called a Naxalt. That's a Naxalt fallacy. That not all X are like that, Naxalt. And the point is, it's like apologizing, right? When you apologize to somebody for having wronged them, and you sincerely want to be forgiven, and you sincerely are apologizing, you don't say, I'm sorry, but. You just say, I'm sorry, and I hope you can forgive me. Well, when you're talking about denouncing a group of people, you can't lead off by saying, I don't think all of these people are this way, but these particular people are bad. That's a Naxalt argument. That's a Naxalt fallacy. Okay? And that's all Mark Collett did all night long. And in some ways, Halsey and I let him get away with it. But truly, anybody with half a brain knows that all he's doing is trying to provide a little bit of rhetorical cover for his own virulent anti-Semitism. So, just an important point to make. So let's talk about Putin real quick, and then let's talk about what I thought was the most important news out of the crypto space in the last, probably 2 months, to be honest with you, since the peak back in December. And that is that Germany, I'll talk about this real quick, that Germany came out today and said that they're not going to tax transactions made in cryptocurrencies. Now, this is new. Right. Even Russia, we've talked about the crypto ruble in the past, and Russia's even gone so far as to say that, they're willing to create a crypto version of the ruble and exempt you from income taxes on the whole value of it, as long as you can prove where you got it from. Then you can just treat it effectively like a stock, and that you only have to pay capital gains tax. Right. So if you bought some crypto rubles for 55. Rubles to effectively 55 rubles to the dollar, and they appreciated to 53 rubles to the dollar, you'd only have to pay income. You don't have to pay capital gains tax on the 2 ruble per dollar profit that you encountered. Now, here's the thing: understand that is still a massive barrier to entry to the use of cryptocurrencies, because now they're effectively, just like the United States, being treated like property, and therefore like stocks, and therefore every transaction has to be documented, written out on the Russian equivalent of a Schedule K or Schedule D or whatever the hell the stock reporting chart is, and then every one of those transactions, laid out. And if you go and buy a candy bar, I've got to pay capital gains tax. You go buy a cup of coffee over at Starbucks, I got to pay capital gains tax. Then when Starbucks turns around and sells those crypto rubles to go buy more coffee, they might have to pay capital gains tax. It's just an accounting and bureaucratic nightmare. Okay, and so it is actually still a massive barrier to adoption that is purely done via legislative fiat. Germany finally came out and said, in the first country to finally come out and say, we're not going to engage in that. You buy stuff with Bitcoins, fine, whatever, we don't care. You bought them in Bitcoins. We don't care. We're not going to tax it. We're going to, they're still going to charge sales tax or value-added tax and all this other stuff. There's plenty of taxes in Germany to make sure that the German government gets their cut. So the price you pay is still going to have sales tax and value-added tax and all the other taxes that go along with it. But they're not going to have a separate capital gains tax for the transaction, which then means that in Germany, Bitcoin can transact with the same level of with at a zero discount, effectively, to the euro. This is a big deal. This is a very big deal. This paves the way for real potential cryptocurrency liquidity in a real market environment that we haven't seen in an official capacity. I mean, we all know that they're buying coffee and pho and all sorts of and and stuff on the streets of Vietnam. Okay, I mean they all accept Bitcoin out there because Vietnam there's 8. If there's not one currency in Vietnam, there's 5. It's just Vietnam, for Christ's sake. But and it's an expression of the fact that Vietnam has such a screwed up monetary system that they've adopted Bitcoin so thoroughly, and the day-to-day transactions for people to to do their business. Same thing's happening in Venezuela, whereas as the bolivar has collapsed, people have turned to cryptocurrencies in order to get business done, accept whatever they have to. It's what happens. People will always look for a way to transact at some kind of zero discount and some kind of minimal discount mechanism, because that's what a medium of exchange is supposed to exist as, what money is supposed to be, it's what currency is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a medium of exchange that is exchanged for goods and services at a zero discount. That $1 now is $1 tomorrow. It's not $1 now is 99 cents tomorrow, or 98 cents tomorrow, or $1.02 tomorrow, or whatever. There's no premium or discount on the currency. It just is the currency. Right? It is the medium. It is itself the medium of exchange, and then hopefully unit of account and other aspects. So very big news out of Germany. This is a very important point, and one that I think has a good chance of helping to get through to help the cryptocurrencies get through to the next level, because it would really be a great evolution of that market. We see that we're now beginning to that governments are coming to the conclusion, or at least some governments are coming to the conclusion, that as much as they would like to fight this, that as much as they would like to shut it down, they can't, because it's in no practical way can they. And it continues to put or at least put to rest the argument that a lot of hard money guys make, that if it ever gets big enough, they'll just shut it down. They'll just shut down the internet. They'll shut down the network or whatever. I'm like, really interesting. How are they going to do that? In the same way that Mark Collette last night could never tell us what is his practical solution to disproportionate expression of Jewish power in global politics, because he doesn't have an answer for that. Because he doesn't have a mechanism for it. Same way, these guys don't have an answer for how practically, what are they going to do? What practical steps, what technical steps are they going to go through from point A to point B? How are they going to shut down these networks without shutting down the entire internet? And if they do that, they shut down effectively Western civilization. And by the way, the source of their own power, because since 95% of all dollars are digital, 95% of all euros are digital, then shutting down the transmission mechanism for these digital dollars and these digital euros in order to shut down Bitcoins it's far worse than cutting off your nose to spite your face. It's literally cutting off your entire head to shave your beard. It's moronic. All right. So there's that. And the last thing I want to talk about tonight. So that's fantastic. So the other thing I want to talk about tonight is I have an article up on my blog right now over tommalongo.me. It's also been recently scraped over to Zero Hedge and over to Russia Insider. As always, within about 12 hours of me writing about a subject like this, those outlets immediately pick it up. It gets retweeted and picked up by 30 or 40 other sources as well. I'm sure that it will probably get picked up by Lou Rockwell at some point as well. And if it does, that would be fantastic, because Lou is one of my favorite people on the planet. But that being said, oh, and by the way, I don't have a platform according to Mark Collette. I'm like, really? Interesting. Do you read Zero Hedge, you fucking asshole? All right. So, Zero Hedge, Vladimir Putin, yesterday, March 1st, 2-hour State of the Union address, which was both the most brilliant piece of campaign rhetoric I've ever seen, and one of the most important political speeches of the 21st century. And Putin's given a lot of these speeches in the last couple of years. And this one's very important, because not only did he admit to the fact that Russia has a demographic problem that they're not going to be able to overcome in any fundamental way, that the post-Soviet Union generation is just too small to overcome the to create a birth, a positive Russian birth rate. And that it will leave or at least a, significantly positive Russian birth rate. It will be very difficult for Russia to grow the economy at any reasonable rate, at any first world rate or whatever. It's going to be very difficult for them to do so. Now that being said, my answer to that, or my rebuttal to that, is to say, well, then the important thing is to look at Russian GDP from a per capita perspective as opposed to a total perspective, because Russian GDP may be flat, but if the population is shrinking, then obviously per capita GDP is rising. Or if the population is only rising at 0.4% or 0.2%, and Russian GDP is rising at 1.5 to 2 or even 3%, well, real wealth is still being generated on a per capita basis of about 3% a year, which is actually really quite impressive. And it's being done on a real basis, i.e., in excess of the inflation rate. Putin really doesn't have anything to be ashamed of. But that's not what was important about the speech. What was important about the speech was, of course, what made all the headlines, which is that Putin unveiled a number of new missile systems that, from a technological standpoint, are groundbreaking. Now, it's not that these weapons were unknown, because they weren't. The Russians, for all intents and purposes, have told everybody what they've been working on for years. This is not the news. The news is that they're willing to announce it to the world, which means that, one, these weapon systems have been deployed. Two, are going into mass production. And three, are not the tip or the cream or the apex of Russian weapon technology. If the Russians are willing to admit to these systems, oh my God, what do they actually have and what's on the near horizon? Because if you're not scared, if you're in the Pentagon today and you were surprised by anything that Putin talked about, then aside from the fact that you should fire yourself for incompetence, especially if you're a CIA analyst or an NSA analyst or anything else, because, look, you should have all this information. That's what we pay you for. We don't pay you to dig up dirt on Donald Trump to try and delegitimize and undermine a duly elected president. Your job is to, keep tabs on foreign powers, and especially the Russians. We expect that. You're going to play the game of realpolitik. Whether I agree with that game or not is irrelevant. That's part of the system. It's part of the game. That is the game. And if you're not going to engage and do the job properly, then don't do the job at all. Stop wasting our time and wasting our money. Just go home. Get a real fucking job. So the fact that this was announced by Putin this way, under these circumstances, 2.5 weeks before the presidential elections, tells me that, one, Putin's not worried about not getting reelected. So all of the saber rattling in Ukraine, sending them anti-tank missiles and all of this stuff, and all of the potential false flag rhetoric coming out of Syria and Eastern Ghouta, it's all nonsense. It's all bullshit. It's all just stuff that will eventually have to be dealt with, because what Putin unveiled, the technologies that he unveiled to the world, make it abundantly clear that he feels very confident that we are not at a situation of mutually assured destruction. That the Russians have the upper hand, which is why, if you look very carefully, why the U.S. has been so adamant about wanting to push missiles and anti-missile systems closer and closer and closer to the Russian border, because the only way we can actually threaten the Russians at this point, this has been going on for years, guys. I've been operating under the assumption that we have not been at MAD for years, that the Russians have had the upper hand in first strike capacity for years. I may be wrong about that. Happy to be wrong. I don't actually know that I'd be happy about that. But it's very obvious that what Putin made clear in his speech was that he didn't want to do this. He begged the United States not to pull out of the ABM treaty. He begged the United States to understand that that Russia will be a great power again and will challenge the United States as a great power in the great geopolitical game sooner rather than later. And that if you don't come to the table and talk to us, then we are going to take steps that you are not going to be able to respond to. And he was absolutely correct in doing so, because look, the Russian military spending and the Russian military industry may have been in shambles when Putin took over. But it's not hard to rebuild that juggernaut when it's that small. When you're talking about people with the kind of know-how that the Russians have in missile technology and in rocketry and everything else, and you have a small organization that doesn't have a lot of bureaucracy left, it may be relatively corrupt, but we're not talking about the effectively multi-trillion-dollar industry that is the web of defense spending and defense contractors and the supply chain. Once you start to really think about that and the amount of loss due to friction within our setup, within our structure, it's no wonder that 80% of the money is wasted and that we get a much lower return on investment, and that we've been involved in these projects like the F-35 and others that are complete boondoggles because, well, from our perspective, there was nobody on our level with our old technology, so what do we have to worry about? And yet here's the Russians unveiling hypersonic nuclear weapons that are, and ballistic missiles and underwater missiles that are powered by miniaturized nuclear reactors that have effectively unlimited range, that can fly around for as long as they want until they decide to pick a target. Or 30. These are weapons that even they can't intercept, and the Russians have better anti-missile technology than we do. We can't even deal with the S-400, and the S-500s are already being deployed. So now what? Where are we now? And we already know that Russian electronic warfare is the cream of the crop. And I have friends who disagree with me on this, and I'm like, really? Huh, okay. I know you want to believe that our guys that our military and our military contractors are more competent than they are. I don't have any faith in any of these people, because at the end of the day, they're bureaucrats, and at the end of the day, they're not being challenged by anybody. They don't have to be. They were put in their positions mostly through politics. I view our defense industry the same way I view most industries, through the lens of the last act of Atlas Shrugged. Just a bunch of politicized, hyper-bureaucratic, bedwetters. I keep waiting for the big sonic weapon to go off and, kill a bunch of people during their demonstration, whereas the Russians are, they're putting the Su-57 into combat. They're getting a combat experience in Syria right now. And this is a plane that we have no answer to. We didn't have answers. We, in many ways, don't even have answers to the last planes that the Russians created, because they can outfight us in every way. They can outfight all of our fighters. Because once it gets to a dogfight, the Americans are in trouble in the air. So, what this means is that Putin has effectively told the world World War III is off the table unless the Americans are completely fucking crazy. And I mean that sincerely. Because there's no scenario where the Pentagon can hit Russia hard enough that it doesn't inflict untold loss of life here in the United States. And Putin will do this. Now, our media response was pathetic. Gilbert Doctorow over at has a great article over at Russia Insider that was put up right before my article went live. I was reading. I actually read it for. I don't know if I read it before or after I wrote my article this morning. It doesn't really matter. But he had a great article up there discussing the media response in the United States and the Defense Department's response in the United States over Putin's announcement. It was really very telling. The New York Times fell all over itself to try and say that Putin was bluffing, and that's just patent nonsense. Who this sophomore writer is, but anybody who's studied Putin at all knows that Putin doesn't say anything he doesn't mean. Putin doesn't bluff. He doesn't bluff at all. At all. Putin does not bluff. If Putin is showing you aces, he's got aces. He's pretty easy to read. The problem is he only ever shows you aces. He doesn't show you, Jack 10 suited. And he's on a flush draw. That fucker's holding a set of aces. Okay? It's very important to understand that. I remember when I was working for Newsmax a few years ago, I sat down and had a great conversation one day with a former CIA analyst. Her name is Lisa Ruth, and she's a commentator over at Newsmax, and we both still contribute to Financial Intelligence Report on a regular basis. And Lisa's a wonderful lady, and we had a great talk about this. We were going to use this as the basis for a promotion for my former newsletter, and it never came to pass because it just never came to pass. But we sat there and we had a great 2-hour chat and a lunch and everything else. And I remember, I'll never forget what she said to me. She said flat out, she said, "Tom, Putin doesn't go to the bathroom without a plan. I mean, he is that guy." And I responded to her. I said, "Yeah, I've heard that joke before, as it pertains to Tom Osborne, the old head football coach over in Nebraska. That guy doesn't go to the bathroom without, he just doesn't go to the bathroom without knowing exactly what the outcome is, because he's just that conservative." And Putin's the same way. Putin doesn't make a move that he doesn't already know the outcome of, and he hasn't already planned all the potential outcomes for, and then knows exactly how he's going to react the next. He's a consummate chess player. I just turned to her, I said, "Lisa, he's an 8th dan in judo. I mean, what more do you need to hear?" So, check and mate on that front. The check and mate. This is a good thing for the world. Let's not kid ourselves. The Americans will come to the table. Donald Trump does not want any part of this. Donald Trump knows that confronting someone with weapons like this is moronic. Donald Trump doesn't want this to escalate any further. This is why he made it abundantly clear at CPAC that our mission in Syria was to oust ISIS, even though our Defense Department and our State Department feels otherwise. So I wonder who's going to win that fight. James Mattis or Donald Trump? In the short term, James Mattis. In the long run, the Democratic mandate will matter. It always does. And Trump has it and Mattis doesn't. The people in America think that we're in Syria to fight ISIS. And every day, more and more people get red-pilled to the understanding of the truth of the matter, which is that we created ISIS. We're allowing Turkey to subsidize Al-Qaeda and the various splinter groups who change their names weekly, by the way, that are affiliated with Al-Qaeda and effectively backed by Turkey and us. And our campaign to inhabit the eastern part of Syria simply to starve the Assad government of much needed oil and gas revenue. That's going to come to an end. Donald Trump is going to have to face some music on that at the midterm elections. And so something's going to happen between now in the midterm elections. And don't kid yourself. Trump wants a political win. All he's got to do is schedule a meeting with Putin. Robert Mueller be damned. Because the way his investigation is going, he'll be irrelevant by June. As will the Democrats. Because they are actually facing existential threat. It's why they're running on Russiagate and ban all the guns. Because what they're actually running on at this point is fomenting civil war. They're going to activate Antifa. Antifa's going to start shooting people. And they're going to blame it all on Trump and his divisive policies. It's all crap. It's not real. But it makes for good hay on TV. And it plays well on CNN. But another 6 months of this stuff and CNN will have their FCC license revoked. Mark my words. All right, guys, you have a great evening. Thank you for stopping by. And for those of you who are new to the channel, please give a like and the subscribe button down below. And you can check out my blog over at tomluongo.me. And if you like what you hear here, you can also sign up and support my work over at Patreon, which is at patreon.com/gold, goats, and guns. Thank you very much. Have a great evening and keep your stick on the ice.